Hi Thomas, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Glad
It's
to
very
be
nice.
here.
Yes, it's very nice to have you. You are super busy. It was hard to organize that little slot in your agenda. So we will be talking today about the Falconeer, of course, but also the different constraints of creating a video game alone on yourself. I wouldn't say alone. You create a video game on your own, but not really alone, because we will see probably that you have been surrounded somehow by several people and several teams. But before we go into this subject, I would like to know more first about yourself as a gamer. I would like to know how you've started to play video games, how you discovered that, and what are the games you were playing.
I am 42 years old, so my first game experience, I think 1980s, were Commodore 64s and MSX machines. I don't know if anybody still remembers the Commodore 64 probably. Playing games on audio cassettes, and then have to rewind the audio cassette to load the game, like the first soccer game on your Commodore 64. And that's how I got into it. And then we had Amigas, I guess, and I would play games. I liked Elite, so which is now Elite Dangerous, but the first one with just the vector lines, those were games I really enjoyed, and adventures. And on Amiga later you had color games, and you had like the Shera adventures.
Yes.
So I enjoyed those a lot as a kid. And now I got into PC gamer. I'm very much a PC gamer in nature. Normally I game on PC, and in the past when I was young, it was lots of flying games. We'll get that to later, but that's the reason the Falconeer is a flying game. So when I was young, you had Red Baron and Aces of the Pacific, and later on you had Crimson Skies, and you had the Chris Roberts Wing Commander games. So that was games who always fascinated me, flying around. When I got older, I like strategy games. Nowadays, I still play Company of Heroes regularly, the first one, not the second one. So and I liked a lot of the Relic games, so like Warhammer 40k, the RTS. I always enjoyed that. And I played lots of Skyrim and RPGs, so that's my secret pleasure when I'm not working and there is a big AAA game, like The Witcher 3. I've played all the Witcher. That is my secret pleasure. I love a big, Dragon Age style RPG.
After that, so you discovered video games like that, and then what happened? You began directly a career in video games?
I went. Well, let's go back. After high school, I could draw, so that was my skill I had. I could draw. I wanted to go to art school, and I knew I've always wanted to make video games. That's what I dreamed of making. But back then there was no university. There was no. We live in the Netherlands. Well, same as in Belgium. We had no, there wasn't anything there. So it is 1996, I guess. So I did a couple of colleges. There's different courses at different universities or colleges. I don't know the right word. And then I ended up at art school where I did interaction design. So there was as close as you could do websites and multimedia. And then the final year, we ourselves started making video games, and they had this master's program. So after that, there were me and two other guys from the art school who wanted to make video games. And then I asked my younger brother to join us, and we started up a studio, but we had no idea. We had zero, we didn't know what a publisher was, we knew how to make games more or less. We had some experience doing that in school and figuring it out by but we had no idea where you would go to find the money to make the game or to even sell the game. So we started to just, ask everybody we knew, and then do you want us to make a game? Or we went out, and then we We talked to people in advertising or television if they wanted us to make a game. And some of them said yes. So that studio then became a work-for-hire studio. So that means people would come to us to make games for them, which they needed, I don't know, for advertising or stuff like that. Did that for a long time.
Okay. And then it began to work?
It began, well, so this is 2001, and I did that. We did that for a long time, and then there was a period that Flash games were really popular on the web. So that's that period. So, and there were sites that were making games on the web where kids would play games, and we were trying to do console games, and we were sort of in between. And at some point, I think in 2012, 13, it started. So I'd been doing that for 12 years.
Okay.
And the studio got bigger and bigger. At some point, I started to dislike that, working for other people. I didn't enjoy it more. It was lots of work. I wasn't making games, talking to people, and you always have to do what somebody else. You're making someone else's dream or creative. So it's really good. You learn lots of skills because there are lots of different technologies. Stuff. So there's a long process there. And then I think then what then happened is in 2012 Skyrim came out.
Yeah.
And I played it, and we had made a small action RPG for a local theme park for the Efteling. You might know that.
Yeah.
Which is a theme park in the southern Netherlands with fairy tales. And we made like a fairy tale RPG. It was really online in Flash and so. But it was a 3D action RPG. I was curious, and we made all kinds of level editing tools and storytelling tools. I'm really curious, how do the big guys do it? So I downloaded the Skyrim mod, how do you call it, a creation kit.
Yeah.
And I started to learn how to mod for Skyrim. And by that time, I had 12 years experience as being a 3D artist. So I would just go, okay, what can this do? Okay, let's put in a new tree. Of course, I didn't mock up a new tree or some things I needed. So I figured that out. And at some point, I figured out that you can turn the snow green in Skyrim, in the shader, in the creation kit.
Okay.
And suddenly the Skyrim world started to look like a jungle. Or it started to look green. If you make all the snow green, it looks like moss.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, let's put a palm tree in there. So I think within 2 months of the game's release, I had a player home that was a jungle instead of a snowy Skyrim landscape. And that just went... That is, and that turned into a bunch of mods called the Moonpath to Elsweyr. I think if you look it up now, people are still making variations of it and translating it, and it's got airships as well. Millions of downloads over the years. I stopped doing that after because it was a lot of work and no pay, and then you had the. So that kicked off for me something in my head with okay, if I make something, actual gamers will like it. Not just something for ads. So that's where it all started. That's where I started to make games for myself, which were just creative and not work for hire.
Okay, and that mod, the Moonpath to Elsweyr, it was like a full game because it was a narrative. There was a story.
Yeah,
and then all the environment and the creatures.
It was pretty big, but it wasn't very well thought out. It wasn't very smartly done. So it was very pretty, but the story, I would just sit, okay, I want to make something with dinosaurs. So I'd imagine some stupid story for Skyrim with dinosaurs, and then I could put a dinosaur in there. Okay. And I'd go to the Skyrim, because I love lore and all this, so the lore websites, and I found, sloths, okay, that's a creature I like. Or Imgas, we were giant gorillas. So I'd make a giant gorilla and just put it in. And then I'd imagine a level or a little bit of an environment around that. And I just put those one after each other. So for some people, every week there would be a new cool environment to the game. For lots of people, that felt like an entire game. Because it was like pretty big in the end. And there were volunteers making voice acting for the characters. And so it was really fun, and it really grew quite big, bigger than I believed it possible. And it was a really good, it was really nice. It was the start of something.
Okay. Nice. And then you decided to go for a full game, or
I decided to go for a full game, and that happened when at that time I was it's slightly dark, but I've told it in other interviews, so it doesn't. But I had a burnout and maybe something a little bit worse. Some stuff happened in my life, and I just really quite a dark period. And I started to make a game that was quite dark as well, called Oberon Scored, which was a full RTS, because I love RTS game, a full RTS in the afterlife, so in the purgatory. So when you die, it would be like with the capturing souls and then spawning them, and they turn into these beastly creatures. I spent 3 years doing that in the evenings. So I had my day jobs, and I do that in the evening. And after a while, at some point, I couldn't work anymore for about 6 months because of the burnout. When it happens, and at some point you go. And then I had to take some time just off, and I couldn't actually work on it because I just didn't have the energy.
Yeah.
And when I got better, then you need to solve your life. So you need to, fix yourself. And one of the things is that I basically started to stop working less and less. And for years now, I've stopped working at the studio I founded with my brother and those two guys, which I had been working on for, 12, 13, 14, 15 years. And I think 3 years ago it became official, or 2 years ago. So I actually stopped that, and that's when my life started looking nice again. And then I looked at that game, to go back and make my own games, and it was too dark. I couldn't touch it anymore. It was too, it reminded me too much of a very negative period.
Yeah.
So it wasn't nearly, I just needed to make 20 levels for that game. It would have been done. It's still there. I have the code. I tweeted about it last week. But it's not. It was also not very fun. So it was all a very difficult game from a difficult time. But from that, the Falconeer was born. From that experience and looking at what I created, and thinking, well, this is quite dark. It's not a terribly fun game to play. It's very pretty, but it was not accessible. Now, the Falconeer is not super accessible, but it's at least more accessible to some than the Oberon Scored, which was just a drag, basically. So you have to be very self-critical, and then after 3 years I get so... Okay. Put that in the garbage, clean everything up.
And start all over again.
Well, you can... I learned my art style I wanted to do for myself through that game. So I had an art style I was working on, and I had some assets, some mountains and stuff. So I just start demoing again, and I was playing around with day-night cycles. So I was making this environment with the same assets and working with colors. And I thought, well, I could fly through this. That's, a strategy game is really difficult to make by yourself, but a flying game, well, it's much more, how do you call it? It's easier to do, than a strategy game. And I thought it's fun. It's something that I enjoyed when I was young. It was my favorite genre, and it has that physical touch where if the controls are broken, because it suddenly doesn't feel right. So I said, well, I'll make something that feels right to me, and then I'll try it out. And that was actually the core principle for the Falconeer.
Okay.
Is that I would make a game that if I broke something, I could immediately feel it.
Yeah.
If you make a strategy game and then you have to wait a really long time to see if it's fun. because you need all the code and all the AI and the characters, and then you need the combat to be satisfying. Then you need a level that's really good, and possibly you need then also a story that's really good before you start to understand if the game is any good. That is a strange genre to do by yourself. It's nearly impossible, I say. Where if you have a flying game, they say, well, okay, we're flying, and if I start to code something and I'll add some drag or change the physics, you immediately go, ugh, which is very important because you always know if it's right, so to speak.
Yeah. So it was a goal that was a bit more reachable than the previous.
Yeah, I think that's the first step of the Falconeers. It's making something that's reachable. And then I first put in a dragon in that world, and I was working on the day night. I had the sunset, and I made a really golden sunset, and I was flying around with this dragon, or actually with the dragon. I said, "Wow, that doesn't feel, that feels cliche. That's something already done. You have Panzer Dragoon, and dragons are so popular that." So I just said, maybe a bird. And I just modeled a bird with a dude on it. And that's it. And I put it in the world. And at first I flew around and I had this golden sunset. And this bird was flapping around. And I went, fuck. This is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And that's...
Yeah, please.
No, that's how it started. It's just that first demo. We're flying around going, wow, okay, yeah, this is what I enjoy in gaming.
Okay. So it was really done piece by pieces, slowly, and you did not really have the final idea from the beginning.
No, it's
something that has built up.
Yeah, I don't write anything down. I'm way too hyper for that. I don't have a design Bible. When the publisher asks me something, I'll write it down for them.
Quickly.
But I don't know. It's I'll just, you just try it out and then you add until it becomes interesting. You have some idea what you want, but it's very, it is a different way of working than, let's say, in a studio where you need to think ahead and you have a list, and then you have sprints and scrums and feature list you work towards. And of course you iterate there as well. But if you're by yourself, you just go, so fuck it. I'll just see what happens. And that's how I made the entire game. I think you sometimes can sense that in the Falconeer, that it's, it's like, I'd say it's like Bob Ross. I don't know if you have Bob Ross in Belgium or France.
Bob Ross? No.
Oh, no. He's an American painter. He's very camp, how do you call it? Is from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
But he will paint these really landscape portraits for everybody. So it's very low art. You would even say kitsch at some points,
Okay.
but he just paints and maybe a little tree lives here and a little cloud. He never knows what he's going to paint, and he has this technique where nothing is a mistake. Everything is a happy accident. And I think I've always liked that. And in the Netherlands, they would put him on TV late at night when I would come home from the pub, drunk or stoned or whatever, and it'd be on. Bob Ross would be painting, and I would go, yeah. And it's just so it's really campy guy painting with a lot of joy, but it's also very spontaneous. So
Yeah.
there's no limitations.
Okay.
I've always enjoyed that. So that's how I made that Moonpath mod. And it's how, of course, I got stuck with Oberon Scored with the strategy game, because that doesn't work in that sense. But for a flying game, you can do that because you can shape the worlds, and at some point, it's nice to do this. Let's see if we can make that into a bigger mechanic. So you can sort of research by playing what's interesting.